I'm Spokane City Council member Richard Rush. We are joined by Rachel Pascal Osborne. Thank you for joining us, Rachel. Rachel is a public interest water attorney who has provided representation to environmental groups, tribes, and labor unions and small communities since 1992. She's the co-founder and executive director of the Center for Environmental Law and Policy and co-founder and a board member of the Washington Water Trust, two groups that are dedicated to the protection and restoration of free-flowing waters in the state of Washington. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Rachel, I wanted to ask you about the implications essentially of doing nothing. If we keep our water rates the way they've been, what are the implications of that? I understand that we actually don't even, the state of Washington doesn't even give out water rights anymore.
Well, that's right. In a number of places, and particularly here in the Spokane watershed, there's been a de facto moratorium on water rights since the mid-1990s, which was about the time we really began to figure out that connection between the aquifer and the river and understanding that increased pumping of groundwater was having a negative impact on the Spokane River.
That slide we saw earlier of the decrease in the summer flows makes it look like we could dry the river up if we overpumped it.
We were heading toward that. I think we were hitting summertime low flows below 500 CFS. Recently, Avista started releasing more water over Post Falls Dam out of Lake Coeur d'Alene. That bumped things up the last couple of years, so you'll see the notches going up.
Okay.
But if we continue to increase pumping, we're going to head right back down again.
So what you're saying is a step has been taken to mitigate those low flows by letting more out of the Post Falls Dam.
Out of Lake
Coeur d'Alene. But we could end that advantage essentially by continuing to pump too much. With an increase in population, is there a chance we'll be able to avoid that fate?
Well, of course, conservation is the answer here. We're looking at an increase in pumping that would be a result of a couple of things. One is the city holds a lot of water rights on paper that could increase pumping over time in response to population growth if there's not a reduction in demand. The city has a large service area that actually falls outside of city boundaries. The city is looking at transferring or sending more water, which would require more pumping, out to the West Plains, for example.
Selling more water outside the city?
That's correct. That could lead to an increase in pumping. And then the state of Idaho is pumping from the same aquifer, and that, the similar problems, pumping water in Idaho affects the Spokane River in Washington.
It doesn't matter where it comes out of the aquifer, it's coming out of the river as well, if it's in Idaho or Spokane, but it's the Spokane River through our city that is impacted.
That's correct.
Have they also suspended the giving of water rights in Idaho?
They have not. We were involved in a case challenging the Rathdrum power plant cases back in 2001, 2002, and Idaho declined to issue water rights to those two facilities, but interesting, since that time, has actually issued water rights to a number of developers, municipalities, et cetera, that equate or actually exceed the amount that would have been given to the power plants.
Wow. So essentially we've got multiple factors here. So it's not only our behavior, it's Idaho's behavior, it's how we work together to preserve our aquifer. Can you talk a little about the study that was prompted by that refusal to essentially give the power plants that additional water right?
I think that when the headline hit that there were these two power plants that were proposing to move to Rathdrum and pump and evaporate 20 million gallons per day, it really woke the community up. And as a result, there was really a bi-state consensus to go and get the feds to pay for an aquifer study. It's known as the bi-state aquifer study. That it confirmed some of the science we already knew. It gave us some new information about how much water is coming into the aquifer, and more detail on the interaction between the aquifer and the river. That study was completed in 2007. A computer model was created. You can actually hypothesize, if you put a new well in here and pump a certain amount, how much will that affect the river? So that's how we know. As Rob said, there's a 1-to-1 ratio on some wells that are pumping with the depletion in the river.
So every gallon out of a particular well will take a gallon out of the river during the summer months?
It depends on the location of the wells, but certainly for the big municipal wells that are located near the river, and that would include the city of Spokane's wells, there is a very close ratio.
Okay, we're taking calls tonight at 625-6337. Please join us, or you can email me at rrush@spokanecity.org. What is the state of Washington, what is Spokane County, the city of Spokane, to do in our relationship with Idaho to preserve a sufficient, sustainable supply of water for the region?
Well, there's a couple of things that really need to be done at this point. There's nothing unusual about two states sharing a resource, a water resource. Aquifer, groundwater, and rivers happens all over the place. Colorado has rivers that are flowing from the Rocky Mountains in every direction. What they do in Colorado, what we haven't done here, is they enter into interstate allocation agreements where the two states that share a particular river or groundwater system divide it up. And, frankly, sometimes this occurs by way of agreement, sometimes it occurs as a result of litigation, but there is a recognition that it's a finite resource, there are multiple demands. Each state has its own management system, its own water rights system, and so there needs to be a recognition of how much goes each way.
Okay.
And I would add, there needs to be a recognition of how much water the river needs. The river itself has a right to have water flowing in it. There's a lot of public benefit to having a healthy river.
No fish, no wildlife, no recreation,
Water quality,
the whole business.
scenic beauty, all of these things are very important to people who live here.
Right.
We do care about our river. But when you have multiple managers, then you have this problem of over-allocation, over-pumping, and so forth. And you see the trend line. The flows are dropping as a result.
But what I'm reading into what you're saying is that responsible behavior will bring a better response, better regulation, better sharing of resource than overconsumption.
That's absolutely true.
And I'm hoping this will be a good first step with our new water rate structure, that we've demonstrated tonight that essentially you can pump as much water as you have been and save more on your water bill. Even under the new rate structure,
Right.
You can have a healthy lawn. And we're acting finally, responsibly, demonstrating we do have good water stewardship in the city of Spokane. And when we do get to, what did you call it, the interstate
allocation.
How do we get to that?
Well, inevitably, the conflict occurs, and usually it's the downstream state that's getting shorted and asks the upstream state to enter into an agreement. Share, exactly. Ideally, that's what Washington and Idaho would do. They would step up. They have sovereign responsibilities. They're trustees. The water is owned by the public for the benefit, owned by the state for the benefit of the public. But if they don't come to a negotiated agreement, then the next step, of course, would be a lawsuit. It's very dramatic lawsuits. They're actually filed in the U.S. Supreme Court, which appoints a special master to conduct trials and determine how much each state is entitled to.
Wasn't there a recent Supreme Court ruling in just that area?
There have been actually a number of Supreme Court rulings, but just in the last couple of months, there was a case involving Wyoming and Montana. In that case, Montana was the downstream state, and Wyoming was pumping to the detriment of Montana, and the court said that was just fine.
Oh, that does not bode well as we are the downstream state here.
It does not.
Okay. So would it be desirable to have an interstate water agreement as opposed to letting the court decide?
Absolutely.
It would? And what do we need to do then to get there? What, other than conservation, which we are now attempting, what sort of agreement between the water purveyors here in Spokane County will help get us in the best position to enter an agreement like that?
The interstate compacting, as this is called, is governed by the U.S. Constitution, and really the matter of entering into an agreement has to be done by the states. However, the states are interested in what the local jurisdictions have to say, and so if the water utilities, the citizens within the Spokane watershed in Washington perceive that there is a problem, they should be conveying an interest, their interest to state government, the governor's office, the Department of Ecology's office, that they would like to see the state of Washington take leadership in approaching Idaho. It's really unlikely that Idaho is going to approach the state of Washington.
Right, they don't have a problem.
Right, they've got the water, so it's all flowing downhill in our direction. So.
Okay. We're here tonight discussing water, the water rate restructure. If you'd like to join in that conversation with my guests, please call 625-6337. I may be wandering off the reservation a little bit with this question, but there was a study recently done apparently by the Washington Water Research Center and the possibility of managing water. What's that about?
The managing entities, the Department of Ecology, and in particular recognizes that we have a problem with low flows in the Spokane River and that the problem is likely to worsen in the future with population growth, climate change, increased pumping. And so the study was looking at ways to mitigate or actually to augment flows in the Spokane River. Because of our unique hydrogeology, the study looked at the potential for taking water out of Lake Pend Oreille, injecting it through wells into the aquifer and allowing the water to basically flow underground, pushing more water.
I'm assuming that would be in the winter months when there's an overabundance of water.
That's correct. And because of the new model, the bi-state model that calculates how, the interconnections, this study was actually able to determine how much water you might have to take at what time of year in order to achieve a target flow, increased flow.
And it sounds like that might also would be something that would be part of the interstate compact with the state of Idaho.
Potentially.
We can't go over there and do that without their sign off.
Well, in fact, I believe to be able to pump water out of Lake Pend Oreille, if the state of Washington wanted to do that, it would have to get a water right from the state of Idaho.
Oh, okay. Well, they're giving them out. Let's
They
get ours
are.
now.
Right.
Well, that doesn't sound like a cheap proposition.
The numbers that I've seen are around, approaching $100 million to do something like this. Then, of course, pumping itself there are costs associated, the electricity of power generation requirements, and so there would be ongoing operation and maintenance costs. I suspect it would be far cheaper to protect flow in the Spokane River through conservation and demand management.
So we may be forced to do that. There's no guarantee Idaho's going to give us a water right, number one. And if they are generous enough to do that, they're certainly not going to pay for us to do it. That's something we would have to bear the expense of as well. You make conservation sound cheap by comparison. Okay, we're talking about the water rate restructure for the city of Spokane this year, and we're at 625-6337. And if you don't call us, we may turn off the lights and go home. So don't have an email either. Well, what would an in-stream flow number look like for the river? You said that they've changed the flow out of the Post Falls Dam. So what is it now? How will that be maintained? How will it be protected?
So because of the losing and gaining aspects of the river that Rob Lindsay just described, the amount of flow in the river differs in different places at the same time. It's kind of an unusual river and system in that way. But the general goal is to have 500 or 600 cubic feet per second at Sullivan Road and 850 cubic feet per second just downstream of the Monroe Street Dam. It's what's known as the Spokane.
And this is where it's measured?
Correct. There's actually not a gauge out in the valley, but there has been in the past. The studies that have looked at how much water we need are keyed to fish life. And we have wild red-band trout in the Spokane River. This is a very valuable wildlife resource. And they're in trouble. And one of the reasons they're in trouble is because water levels are dropping. And so the goal is to try to maintain flow at a level that is healthy
Is there a science around that? Has there been a number determined for healthy red-bound trout population preservation?
There's quite a lot of science that's been done. In-stream flow incremental method studies, or IFIM studies, physical habitat simulation studies that look at, the transects across the river. How much flow do you need in a certain place? Because we have areas where the aquifer is coming back in, typically the water is cold when it's returning from the aquifer and recharging back into the river. That's really healthy habitat for trout, and we want to maintain flow there so that the trout are abundant and we're not at risk of losing the local population.
So it sounds like the science around fish habitat and a healthy river has been done.
That's correct.
It's just a matter of what? Garnering the political will to put a number on that and make it so?
So there was a watershed planning process that's been going on since 1999. It had multiple purposes, but one of them was to, for the local utilities, citizen groups, and other water users to try to come together and come up with a recommendation on the right number for the river and make a consensus recommendation to the state. The state would then adopt a formal regulation saying we're going to have X amount of water in the river at these different control points.
But wouldn't the science essentially inform that number?
One would hope so. However, there was not consensus. In fact, one of the parties blocking consensus was the city of Spokane, which wanted a flow that was significantly lower than
the fish science would say?
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll get to work on that. What, do you know the number?
Which number?
The healthy fish, the amount of water you essentially have to maintain in the river to have a healthy fish population.
A minimum flow at the below Monroe Dam would be 850 cubic feet per second,
850.
which is, we were dropping to 500 during the low flow period.
Right.
We've bounced up because Avista's putting more water in the river during summer months.
Thank you, Avista.
But now, well, we really thank FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory
Thank
Commission.
FERC, too.
And a couple of organizations that hung in there and argued for it on behalf of the river. But we're, again, as I say, we're looking at increased pumping in the future because of population growth, decreased flow because of climate change. And so we need to maintain the healthy flow that we've got right now.